good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. We are very thankful to all of you for joining this webinar. My name is Hussain Jaffrey, and I'm the Executive Director of World Patients Alliance. This webinar is being organized as a result of our membership survey, in which you, the member organizations, actually informed us that fundraising was an important issue on which you wanted us to do some things, some sort of training and advocacy sort of webinar. So this is what we are organizing at the moment. We have an excellent panel of speakers and resource persons, and I'm sure you are going to learn a lot from their experience. But before I invite our first speaker, I would inform you that after the initial presentations, we'll have the discussion and question and answer session. So if you have any questions or comments, please write them in chat. So we'll be asking our panelists, the speakers, your questions. So first of all, I would like to invite Andrew Spiegel. He is the chair of World Patient Alliance, and he has a long experience of working in patients advocacy area. Andrew is he also co-founded the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, and now leading the US-based National Patients Organization dedicated to colon cancer. Andrew is also the co-founder and executive director of Global Colon Cancer Alliance, an international patients advocacy organization of nearly 50 colon patient advocacy organizations from around the world. So it's over to Andrew for the welcome and introduction to World Patients Alliance.
I've already learned one thing, which is that I need to update my photo, because the photo you put up there clearly has more hair than the one I'm seeing of myself in this window. So that's one thing I've learned. I need to update my photo. But welcome everybody, and thank you, Hussain, for that introduction. It's really my pleasure to bring you this very, very important webinar. And as Hussain says, this is exactly what you, our members, wanted to hear. And so we've done our best to compile some of the world's experts in fundraising. And we all know there's no magic bullet to fundraising, and there's no magic pill where you simply follow a plan and you automatically will be successful. There's many dynamics to fundraising, and hopefully some of the people that we brought in will give you some great advice on how your organization can get through these really challenging times. We have heard significant problems across the nonprofit world of organizations not being able to deliver their services during the pandemic because of a lack of funding. We've heard organizations that have had to close their doors. So we thought this is a really timely idea to bring this together. So the World Patients Alliance, as all of you know, we are an umbrella organization of patients and patient organizations and stakeholders from all over the world, brought together in order to make sure that the patient's voice is at the center of all policy discussions and all discussions happening that involve patients' access to safe, quality, affordable, and innovative healthcare and medicines. And we work to ensure that the patients have an active role to play, making sure that the patient voice is represented from before clinical trials, all the way through clinical trial design, all the way through drug development, all the way through post-marketing data collection, all the way through the entire life cycle process of therapies and diseases, and making sure that the patients are centered and that all decisions that are being made are made with the patient in mind. And there is, of course, no fees for any of our members, for any of our programs that we bring to our patient groups. Thanks to the generosity of industry, we are able to provide programs like this and all the other programs that we provided last year to our membership. Our board is me. I've been the chair since 2019. And our secretary is Penny Cohen, who's been in the pain space for more than 40 years. And unfortunately, Penny just got out of the hospital, so she can't join us, I think, today. But our treasurer is Jolanta Belinskia. She is the director of development in Poland at the Social Community City Medical Center. And Jolanta has been on the international patient advocacy stage for decades and is very well known. Carla Luis de Castilla is the CEO of Esperanta and the Latin America Union Against Lung Cancer. And she is our Latin America representative and has brought many Latin American organizations to the organization and is really a great representative of that region. Regina Kamaga is the Executive Director of Community Health and Information Network, and she is located in Uganda, in Africa, and she brings us more than 80 African members, I believe, and is going to be running our African regional meeting, which I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes. That's going to take place this summer, but that's your board of directors. So you can see that since we have started only 2.5 to 3 years ago at this point, we have rapidly grown to now 340 members from 110 countries, and we're really proud of our membership and how we've grown. We are now the largest patient group on the planet that crosses all diseases, and we're really proud of the response that we've had from you, from our patient community. And it's a very loyal community. When we send out a survey, we have hundreds of responses, which is really unheard of. Our response rate is something in the 50 to 70% rate. So we really appreciate our members being as engaged as they are. And by the way, our members are growing. There's not 2 or 3 days that go by that we're not receiving a couple of applications in. So we're really proud of that. As I mentioned, our first African regional meeting is going to take place in July, and we're looking at Cape Town, South Africa, as our first regional meeting, and watch for more information on that. If there are industry folks on the call who are interested in getting involved in our African regional meeting, you can let Hussein know or me, and we can have a conversation about that. But we are in the planning stages already of identifying the location and the agenda. So that is happening in really just a few months. And then, of course, we want all of you to be together this fall in Rome, Italy. We have just signed the contract, believe it or not, for our hotel. This will take place at the Crown Plaza in Rome, October 15th and 16th. There will be a virtual component for those who cannot attend. There will also be bursaries or grants for those who want to attend, but don't have the financial means to attend, that we will be able to cover some of the travel for you to attend. There will be no cost, and registration will be opening soon. So it really will be amazing if we could all be together in Rome in October, and hopefully the pandemic will be agreeable with us, and we will all be together in a few months. So mark your calendars, please, everybody. October 15th and 16th will be the World Patients Alliance first Global Patients Conference. And our theme this year is New Normal, Same Challenges for Patients. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because we're all living in a new normal. But with that new normal comes new challenges for patients, and we're going to address all of that at our conference. Okay, here's our agenda for today. I'm going to turn things back over to Hussein, who's going to go through the agenda, and then he's going to introduce our first speaker. So once again, thank you all for attending, and we look forward to more of these webinars throughout the year.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, for the introduction. So we'll now formally start our webinar. And the first presentation, I'm just going through the agenda first. The first presentation is going to be on what fundraising is, introduction to fundraising. And the next presentation after that would be, how to really raise, how NGOs can raise funds from the foundations. And then we have two industry representatives, and they will be telling us about how best to work with the industry and how can it really benefit the patients and patients' organizations. And then in the last, we'll have a case study from Africa on how about this case study of how they actually raise funds for their organization in Africa. And after that, we'll have a discussion and question and answers session. So this is the program. And so I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker. He's a very old friend of mine, Michael Splain, from the US. He is the owner and principal in Splain Consulting, a small advocacy and government affairs consulting firm based in the Washington, DC. Immediately prior to starting this company, Mike was the Director of State Government Affairs in the Public Policy Division of the US Alzheimer's Association, with whom he enjoyed and worked for over 23 years. He is the managing partner of a related company, Recruitment Partners, focused on improving the pace, quality, and diversity of recruitment into dementia clinical trials. Mike is a consultant to the Alzheimer's Association US and the CDC Healthy Brain Initiatives, and recently was a lead on behalf of the association on its roadmap for Indian country document and now its related outreach. Mike also serves as a consultant to International Psychogeriatric Association and the International Indigenous Aging Association. So over to Mike to tell us what fundraising is.
Well, good day, everyone. I realized late that both Michael and I are presenting, so to keep us apart, first of all, he's the good-looking one. Second of all, call me Mike. Don't ever call him Mike. But he is my brother from another mother, as is Hussein, and I'm delighted to reconnect with Hussein after many years working together in the Alzheimer community. Thank you. As is customary, I have a list of clients. I want to assure you that none of them have directed this talk. Yeah, is this what comes to mind when you think about fundraising? It's some hideous monster. It's somebody else's job. It's something to shy away from. But in many organizations, it's much more like this classic tale of the blind people and the elephant, each having a different piece of reality. Somebody thinking by pulling the tail, it's the rope, grabbing a leg, thinking it's a tree trunk, and so on. And I think that's fundraising in a lot of small organizations, that somehow everybody's got a little piece of the truth. Everybody's got a little piece of the action, but somehow it doesn't all come together coherently. So what I thought I would do is just reflect on my experience as a grassroots organizer, as somebody who's worked either for or with nonprofit organizations my entire career, thinking about reflecting on how do you bring this together in some unified way at a kitchen table or just a little bigger than a kitchen table organization, which many of you represent. So let's start at the beginning. So fundamentals. Somebody has to put their big girl pants on, as my daughters say to me all the time. Somebody has to admit the fact that if we have no money, we have no mission. We can only go on air and volunteer time so long. But I think what happens when we hear this at a workshop or we hear this at a board meeting, I think we freeze up, because we may not necessarily have defined our unique mission. What is our place in the world that we can talk to people about in an excited way that they can join our mission? So I think it's important to define your unique mission. Now, many of you are, for example, many of the international groups represented here are a specific form of a particular disease, a specific cancer. That's a long way toward being able to define your unique mission. But there are other ways to do it, and I think it's just really important. Where I think people fall down is they can't do that. Secondly, nobody loves a problem. You are not organizing. You are not asking for people to join your mission with their time and talent and money because you're fixing a problem. You are solving a problem. You're solving an access problem. You're solving a science problem. You're solving an awareness problem. You're solving a problem that people that have your particular disease or disability can't access the workforce. Nobody gets excited about a problem. We all go, ooh, right? So you're energizing around a problem. I think many organizations, many small organizations, fail to refine a tagline. You've got to be able to get what you're all about. We used to call it an elevator speech when people actually used to talk to each other in elevators, not run around from, being frightened that we have more than two people in an elevator. Hopefully we get back to that day someday soon. But I think it's really important to be able to say, this is what we're about, and in a very pithy and tagline kind of way. And this takes work. This takes imagination. And Interestingly, the best taglines I've ever heard in the communities I've worked in come right out of the membership. Asking the people affected by the problem that you're trying to solve, asking the people that you are working with and trying to rally around a problem, how would they describe what your organization represents? Great work to be able to do that and pull that right from the community. So we got to get into our heads, no money, no mission, but define that unique mission, stay solution focused, and get it down to a 30-second speech. Don't tell me in the beginning of the time you have islets of Langerhans and they were discovered in 1893 and they make insulin and insulin stop. We help patients who have diabetes have better lives. Boom, right? You with me? I think it's really important to develop a budget. A budget, after all, I chair a board right now at church. Well, it's actually an interchurch agency. And let me just say, all the various names of God that come into the politics of running a small organization are really interesting. I end my board term in June, thankfully. But our budget is our work plan. So it really reflects our ideas for the year or for a 2-year period about what we're going to do. And I encourage people, very, very grassroots organizations, to develop even the simplest of budget, because from a budget, you have a menu of options for funders. You have the pieces that you can talk to people about specifically that they can help you by giving you donations. A budget is a fundamental accountability document. It shows that you have fiscal controls, and increasingly the people on whose doors we are knocking are expecting that we act in a grown-up manner and have a budget, an accountability document, and something that shows that we have some sense of fiscal controls. It's very hard, particularly as Michael will talk about foundations or other giving that is higher level. It's very hard to do that. Also, in Western countries, folks have developed the habit of using the internet to find out whether or not a charity is in good standing or follows good ethical practices before they write a check. It's become very, very common. So I think a budget, it shouldn't be intimidating, but I think it reflects your ideas, your priorities for the year, and it creates that menu that you can talk to people about funding. Ask. I just find it's very interesting that the failure to fundraise many times is a failure to ask. And it shouldn't be as hard as the advocacy you do. It's the same skill set as the advocacy you do to get political attention to your cause. You're being a voice for others. You're doing something moral and ethical and important in the world. You shouldn't be afraid. But I think there's a fundamental here where, particularly if we silo fundraising to a committee, because it's all icky, if people ask and they know what they're asking for, you will be successful. Next slide. So when you're asking, you need a little structure to it. So I think the first is, as you ask, figure out who cares or who could care about what I want. Many of us do this very intuitively, but not everybody is necessarily going to care about what we want. Rely on the fact that all communities have money. I've worked in very poor communities in the United States. I've worked some international work, and all communities have money for that, what they deem important. It's amazing. I learned a long time ago when I was trained as a community organizer classically in the United States by an organization led by Saul Alinsky, if anybody knows that other than Michael Marcus. And they taught us that we do 3 things at every meeting if we're going to build a successful organization. We ask people to give us their name and contact information. We remind them of what our mission is with our tagline, and we put a basket out of some form and ask people and inspire people to fund the organization. You can't imagine, even in the poor communities, if you remind people of the mission, if you ask them for their contact information so that you can include them in your organization and in your organization outreach. And if you put some form of contributory basket available for people, if they believe in a mission that they could support it, it's amazing what kind of things can happen. I think your ask is going to be better. Asking is going to be better is if you teach and brief solicitors. Have people practice. We do this in advocacy training. Poor Hussein has suffered with my advocacy training more than once, where we put people into a delegation and we pretend to have them meet with their minister of health. Role play it out. Have your solicitors listen to somebody who objects. Have your solicitors practice with somebody who wants to contribute, but I don't know, they might want a special spot on the board, or they might want some kind of an interest represented in return for their contributions. I think part of the failure in small organizations when they ask is that they haven't taught and briefed or at least rehearsed with the people that are soliciting. One other part of asking is to accept useful in-kind contributions. And I mean useful in-kind contributions. My wife worked in Catholic schools for 42 years. So that's a lot of contributions. That's a lot of being asked, by the way. The faculty always was asked, and 100% of the time, her faculty would give something to the annual fund. But they also had a really hard time because they were known to be a soft touch for anybody that wanted to get rid of bad computers, old computers. Now, as it turned out, some of those carloads of old computers once that they accepted actually had a monetary value, but most of the time it was going right to the dump. So if you're going to accept in-kind contributions of either materials or some kind of office equipment or whatever, make sure that it's useful and a useful in-kind contribution. Last tip I'll give you is the magic I see in fundraising today, the magic I see in grassroots fundraising today that seems to almost always work is a match campaign. Somebody said, if you say we're trying to raise $5,000, we have a donor or we have donors that will match every gift up to $5,000 so that we get 10. Match campaigns seem to be, whether you're in the online environment, you're soliciting people face to face, you're challenging people with a piece of mail or in your newsletter, any of the different ways that you can get an ask out, matching campaigns seem to pull at people. The people are just inspired by them. So something to think about as you develop your ask. Thank and acknowledge. I think this is the second most common failure in grassroots fundraising, which is that we fail to thank and acknowledge people who give gifts. I met with one of our clients that we met with yesterday. I'm on a road trip with the clients. Recently had a small fundraising drive, and the first question that I asked them was, has everybody been thanked? And I got a very embarrassed, you know the look. Thank and acknowledge. I think you need to do it promptly. You need to acknowledge donors too in whatever public way you can without endorsing, but follow donor wishes. Some folks who want to give anonymously, and I think that's important that we follow those donor wishes. Last, report periodically on your progress. Tell people what you're doing and how it's making a difference in the world. Thank and acknowledge. So just a real bullseye that'll be in the permanent record of this meeting, but target your effort. You can start with your leadership and members, roll out to the believers. As my friend Joan Flanagan always said, raise money from your leadership and your leaders before you ever go to the general public or people that are consumers of your services. A word about consumers of your services. I think we sometimes cheat the people we are trying to serve in voluntary health organizations by not even thinking about them as part of who could support our organization. We think of them as getting our services, but somehow we don't ever necessarily think, or we somehow think it might be unethical to ask them to contribute toward the cost of anything that we do as an organization. I take the point of view that you're asking people and inviting people to join your very exciting mission, and that it is not unethical. What is unethical is, in fact, other kinds of behavior that we won't talk about here. Just a caution, there is a tangle, depending on where you live, of laws, regulation, and accountabilities. If you take money from the general public, something to be aware of, and I'm sure all of you as board members know those things and pay attention to those things. But it's growing, and it's growing more tangled, and the more you do, the more attention you will get. Here's my contact information. Let me offer, there's an old, I'm referencing a book from 1992. When Hussein said I was one of his old friends, I was like, yes, I am. I'll own it. But I had hair as brown as his before my daughters were teenagers. I just want to point that out. Anyway, Joan Flanagan wrote a book that's, you can, it's widely available. It's only in English, but it's called The Grassroots Fundraising Book. It's been out of print for a while, but you can always find it on, you can find it on many of the commercial websites. Joan Flanagan's book, The Grassroots Fundraising Book, one of the best simplifying how to do fundraising books ever written for any kind of grassroots organization. Joan is passed, sadly, but her wisdom lives on in that book. Feel free, either we're going to hang around, answer questions in the chat, but I think if you want to talk offline in any way, my contact information is there. Hussein knows that I am generally very prompt to answer emails, try to answer them within 24 to 36 hours. And thanks for having me on, Hussein.
Yeah, so thanks, my old-time friend, not old friend. So, and I think it's and thanks for your wisdom as well. And I really like what you said. Failure to fundraising is failure to ask. And I've seen many of us, we are really not clear about our ask as well, and how to really put it forward. So I really appreciate that. All right, so we thank you very much, Mike, and now we have Michael Marcus, not Mike and the handsome one, as Mike just put it. So let me introduce Michael. He is currently the principal of the Consultants for Community Resources, which provides ABCD consultation to the nonprofit sector, principally those working with older adults and in intergenerational settings. Michael has over 30 years of experience as a grant maker, manager, organizer, trainer, and facilitator, working with organizations, government agencies, universities, and foundations in aging, disability, and homelessness, food security, housing, child welfare, and poverty. So as a grant maker, Michael made nearly 1 billion in grants. So a lot of experience for not-for-profit organizations. So he has worked as grant maker from 1983 to 1990 with the Willers Foundation, also known as Families USA. Moreover, he has also worked with Chicago University Trust from 1990 to 2004, and from 2007 to 2016, Michael led the Harry and Janet Weinberg Foundation, which is the largest funder in aging in the United States. Michael has a doctorate degree and has taught at leading universities of America. So over to Michael on telling us about how patient organization and NGOs can get funding from foundations.
Thank you, Hussein. I want to meet this guy, Michael Marcus. I know this guy, Mike Splade. He's terrific. He's not only the smart one, he's the pretty one too. So I just want to make sure people knew that. I'm going to take us first through Foundations 101, so we know who it is that we're talking to when we talk about foundations, which I take it as my assignment here. So that's me. You can see two of us. That's the good-looking me, and you can see my my website there. At the end, I can give you my email address and my phone number as well. When we talk about foundations, we're talking about grant-making foundations, and I want to be clear, this is in a US context, although internationally, the differences, with some exceptions, are not so great. When we're talking about foundations, there really are 4 different kinds of grant-making foundations. There are community foundations, which are really kind of the community's endowment. It's money that's given to sustain the well-functioning activities of the community itself. In the US, there are about 3,100 of them, although only about 760 make grants on a regular basis. And then worldwide, there's an additional 1,700. Depending on the country, their behaviors are different. I've worked with community foundations in 6 or 7 other countries. As grant-making organizations, community foundations are often those that have the greatest connection with their local communities, because their boards tend to be made up of local community activists themselves. And within community foundations, there are a variety of different kinds of funds. We can get into that later on during the question and answer period. I want to use our time getting into the weeds now. Corporate foundations are the organizations, they're not-for-profit organizations that generally give out pre-tax corporate dollars in order to, for a variety of reasons, give the corporation a better face in the community, support activities of their employees, and sometimes their specific customers in a particular community, and sometimes make sure corporations are able to have a positive spin on their activities in particular places. The boards of those corporate foundations are usually people who work for the corporations themselves, and they are often a place that will make grants to help organizations establish their own presence in local communities. We can talk about that a little bit later. There are about 3,000 in the US. I'm not sure. There aren't precise numbers about corporate foundations around the world because the way that different countries measure or count them is somewhat different. Independent or family foundations make up the bulk of foundations that are out there. Those are the giant ones like the Gates Foundation, or the little tiny ones like the Marcus Foundation, which is truly very small, gives money to a single program every year, has been since I was in my early 20s in a single town in New Jersey where I grew up. There are about 87,000 of these in the US, and around the world there are probably another 8,000 to 10,000. And finally, there's an interesting animal which is particularly relevant to health-related organizations in the US and in some other countries. And these are the foundations that were founded as with the profits of the sale from not-for-profit health companies, like in the US, Visiting Nurses Association, or not-for-profit hospital, to for-profit actors. There are about 200 of these, and there are experts of these at a place called Community Catalyst in Boston. Those are the folks who really know these kinds of organizations. So, and like community foundations, they're usually very hyper-local. People pay a lot of attention to them. So in the US in 2020, Americans gave $471.44 billion to charity of one sort or another. And that's the trackable dollars. Those are the dollars that are able to be counted by the IRS. In other countries, depending on the country you're in, the percentages are relatively similar, although again, it's hard to track them because they're done differently. This information comes from Giving USA, which is an annual report about giving in the United States. As you can see, the bulk of giving comes from individuals, 69%. No reason to believe that's changed during the pandemic. And in fact, it may have even grown during the pandemic itself. Mike made a great point earlier. He made many great points, one of which is, if you're going to be asking for money, don't forget to ask individuals, particularly your board. 100% of your board should be making contributions. Foundations look for that, by the way, when they make grants. And it almost doesn't matter how much they give. It's so that they have a bit of the actions going on. Foundations give 19%. That's way up over the last decade. I remember the days when that was 8 or 9 or 10%. In recent years, it's 19% is really very high. And it grew during the pandemic years. A lot of foundations set aside or dove into their trusts to increase their giving because pandemic was having such an impact on the organizations they ordinarily fund. Bequests, those monies that are left as a result of a will, for example, or 9% of money is given, and corporations gave 4%. That's aside from the corporate foundations. Corporations have 3 ways of giving: through their corporate foundations, which is pre-tax dollars, from their PR departments, which are usually the monies that they give for local dinners and local events. And then finally, they collect money from their employees, and their employee paychecks would be distributed from particular funds they have. So what we're going to do for the next next few slides, is talk about funding priorities and local trends in grant making. And these are pretty universal. So foundations set priorities using a variety of tools, their vision and mission. It's not always it's almost never totally random. By analysis, this is particularly true among larger foundations. By understanding the local needs in communities may be very different. By whatever their focus, particularly their boards are. My former employer, the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, had a complete change of boards in the last 4 years. And so the focus of the foundation has not changed in general, but in very specific kinds of ways, which we can get into later through goals and objectives that they have through their particular approach. Do they fund program? Do they fund capital projects? Through doing education of themselves, through the decisions that they made in the past and how they communicate those things out to the rest of the world. The good is that foundations have become increasingly sophisticated in the way they have their focus, and they are looking for ways to make greater impact. Lots of foundations are far more engaged than they were in the past. They will do a lot of internal education. A lot of foundations look for a way to collaborate. I was a founder of something called Grant Makers and Aging. And before Grant Makers and Aging, foundations would do what they did. Once Grant Makers and Aging was founded, and that's known as a Grant Maker Affinity Group, as a category of organizations, we started talking to the other grant makers that funded in that area. When we started, Grant Makers and Aging had maybe 10 or 12 members. Now there are a couple of hundred, mostly in the United States, but not entirely. They look for shining stars. We're going to talk about more about that in a minute. And they want to use, because they have more dollars, there's often more flexibility. And yes, foundation dollars have gone up. The bad is that they're more savvy in some ways, so that they look for ways to know more about what you're doing. There's less money for startup projects, so you have to prove your mettle before you often get funded. There's increased mergers among not only funders, but among not-for-profits as well. There have been reduced contributions to grantees, kind of contradictory to the former point that there are decreased dollars for startups. And even though there's more money, a lot of foundations are giving to fewer organizations. The ugly. So there have been reductions in capital campaign support. This has been a trend over the years. In part, that has to do with the increased cost of building things. My former employer, the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, is required by its charter to spend 50% of its money on capital campaigns or capital projects. And we can talk some more about that later, but they're very expensive. In some places, even though there's been more funding for during the pandemic period, there's also been some grant activity which has been suspended, in part because of the pandemic and because of the hits that the foundations took when they made the larger grants that they had. And finally, there are state and local budget deficits and cuts, and as a result, foundations have often had to step into the breach. So when you're taking a look at what foundations to go to, and I assume Hussein, everybody's going to get a copy of this, is going to get a copy of this, correct? Because I don't want to jump into this now. We don't have a whole lot of time. I can answer some questions about it in a minute. But when you're doing that, make sure there's mission alignment. That you need to look at what giving capacities foundations have, what kind of funding they do, whether or not you have relationships, what the timing is for your ask itself when you're doing research. Tear through these because we don't have a lot of time. So this is the 10 commandments of grant seeking. 1, do your homework, know who you're asking. Number 2, be honest with yourself about who you're asking, what you're doing, what you're asking for, how much you're asking for. Foundation says they give grants in general of $25,000. Don't ask for $250,000 unless there's a particular way. Commandment number 3, understand what the funder needs. They're a not-for-profit too. Number 4, have sound bites, what Michael said, the elevator speech. Number 5, talk first. If they say you can be in touch, call them. Number 6, look locally first, not the big nationals. Number 7, be visibly successful. Let people know what you're doing. Number 8, nurture relationships. Get to know people. It's like you're asking for a date or a dance. Number 9, you need to be persistent with foundations. They say no once, go back. Number 10, don't give up. Don't give up. Don't quit. Think about why you started. And finally, here's some resources. My favorite is the Foundation Center and the Foundation Directory online, which you can get from the Foundation Center, right? And finally, last slide. Thank you. That's how you get in touch with me. mmarcuscommunityresources.guru. That's my website. That's my phone number.
Thanks a lot, Michael. I think it's very helpful. And I think some of the lessons that at least I have learned is, you need to do your homework and do it well. You need to understand what the funders' priorities are. And many of the times, us patient organizations are just concentrating on our own objectives, our own issues, and, we don't realize what the funder is looking for. And, and then we nurture relationships. And, they're very important, that, we should not give up. We should keep trying and keep trying to improve ourselves. So thank you very much, Michael. So our next speaker is Patty Jewell, and she is the Senior Director, Patient Advocacy, US Co-Lead in Pfizer Global Health and Social Impact Department, basically focusing on collaborating with patient advocacy organizations across the therapeutic areas on public policy and patient centricity initiatives in the US. So prior to this role, Patty led Pfizer's strategic engagement on global and US cancer policy and public affairs matters, and basically focusing on breast cancer and related issues, as well as a portfolio of pan-tumor topics, including health equity and the value of cancer medicines. Patty has also worked in alliance development, state government relations, and grassroots advocacy for Pfizer, and was a legislative assistant to the United States Senator before joining Pfizer. She received a master's in public administration from New York University and bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Michigan. So over to Patty, how best to work with industry.
Thank you so much, Hussein. And Andrew, it's so good to be with everybody here today. I really appreciate the invitation. I was asked to think about or to talk about how can patient advocacy groups work with and fundraise from the biopharmaceutical industry. So I'd like to start with the idea around independence and respect for the patient advocacy organization's mission. I've been looking at the chat, and there's been some conversation about this, and I would just say to start with, from an overarching perspective, that philosophically, I think it's very important for there to be recognition about the independence of the patient advocacy organizations and the mission and the work that you all do. And it's my experience that people in the pharmaceutical industry very much respect that independence and your mission. And we want to work with you because of the important work that you do to support patients getting the information and care and support that they need for their particular health condition. And I think I would also give the advice that if you don't feel that respect and independence from a pharmaceutical company, then perhaps that's not somebody that you want to work with. So that's foundational. And some of the ideas that I talk about, just have 2 slides. Some of the ideas that I talk about will also speak to that, and the idea that the pharmaceutical industry, and Pfizer in particular, has put in rules and guidelines to help ensure that independence and respect. So when you think about how to work with a pharmaceutical company and in part with fundraising, we want to be patient focused. We want to be oriented around support for the condition. And we would encourage you not to think just about a particular medication, but about the condition that you're working in. I think that in the past, some of the maybe concerning work or concerning relationships that have taken place is because the work has gotten too close to a particular medicine, and that could lead to the perception that the patient advocacy group is working to sell the medicine. And you don't want that. The pharmaceutical company doesn't want that. One way to avoid that is to focus on the condition and not on a specific medicine. A second point that has come up already today is around open and transparent communication, right? Be clear about your mission and what you want to do. And if there's a specific project, and likewise, ask the pharmaceutical company, what are you interested in here? What are you thinking about? And sometimes those interests will align, and sometimes they might not. And, for that particular project, but maybe in a few months or in a year, there will be alignment. But having that communication, I think, is really helpful and really important. We've also found that it's helpful to have one person at the pharmaceutical company and one person at the patient advocacy group that are known as the key points of contact. Now, they can each work with others, but it's very helpful to be clear on, I'm your lead, I will help you navigate, I'll help you learn. For the pharmaceutical companies, I'll help you learn the different people in the company, the different areas of interest. And for the patient advocacy group, it's the same on your side. You work with a lot of different people. You may not have a big staff, but you work with a lot of volunteers and experts in the community. Another way to help, especially with any concerns around independence and clarity, is to have written agreements in place regarding funding. I think most pharmaceutical companies do this now. I know Pfizer does, And I do think it helps to work through what are the specific arrangements and agreements that are in place. Another idea is that that you could have a program where you would have multiple companies fund one initiative. I think that, again, this helps with the independence, that you're not beholden or doing the work of one particular company. Sometimes there will be programs where it's just one company, but other times you could solicit from multiple companies or a mix of stakeholders, such as foundations or other organizations. And then lastly, the partnerships don't always need to be financial. They can, we have a lot of expertise within pharmaceutical companies, whether it's around research or communications or policy advocacy. So perhaps that we participate in a way that's providing a voice at the table that provides some insights that you might not otherwise have. And then I thought it could be helpful to think about some of the similarities between companies and some of the differences. And Kathy, you might, I'll be curious to see if you agree with this, might have additional comments. But to me, what I see in the industry is that there is a lot of respect for the independence of the patient advocacy groups. On the sort of operational and logistical side, we do have rules that govern how we can work with patient advocates, what types of activities we can fund. Now, the complicating side on the differences column is that those rules vary company by company. And I don't envy you all to have to figure out what is the different rules from Pfizer compared to other companies. But we do have rules, and so it is important to understand the rules of the company that you're talking to. Our budget cycles are usually 1 year, and as I mentioned before, we usually do require agreements of legal documentation. Some of the differences have been touched on before, and I think also in the chat, where there are definitely local laws and cultural norms that you want to be that matter, that impact how a company in a particular country can work with a patient advocacy group. So get to know your local rules because that really dictates how we can work together oftentimes. I've mentioned that there could be differences in how companies define particular activities. A sponsorship or a collaboration may mean something slightly different from company to company. So make sure to ask your contact, what I want to do this type of activity. What is it called? How could we do that? So that you have clarity about the language and the approach. And similarly, there could be differences in different types of activities that companies could support. One company may want to focus a lot on engaging around research, whereas another might want to focus more on disease education and/or policy advocacy. So talking to your a pharmaceutical company person about what types of activities they like to support could also help you focus on where you want to take your conversation with a company. So I'll wrap it there. I'm happy to take questions that people might have.
Thanks, Betty. I think that's very useful, and I particularly, I think that the emphasis in the last three presentations is constantly on being clear on your mission and why you are doing it. I think that's a key message that's coming across all presentation. And then I also like the sort of what you said, that partnership can be more than just financial. You can get a lot more out of this partnership, and these could be in terms of other resources that you can get out of this partnership, like research and educational tools and all that. So that's very helpful. Thanks, Betty, for that. So our next speaker is Kathy Trass, and she is the Executive Director and Head of Global Advocacy, Bristol Myers. She has broad advocacy experience gained through leadership roles at Bristol Myers, Endo Pharmaceuticals, and GlaxoSmithKline. She also gained her expertise in health policy and patient advocacy, working for the New Jersey governor and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Found Society. Kathy is the architect of a number of important initiatives such as the Advocacy Exchange, a global virtual platform created to unite advocacy organizations, patients, and the industry leaders in the exchange of information. Then patient expert engagement research peer, a groundbreaking effort to bring the patient's voice into the business. Then another initiative is the CEO Roundtable, an ongoing meeting with leaders from patient advocacy groups and corporate to discuss best practices related to access to care and outreach to underserved communities. She also leads the health equity and advocacy delivery on commitments announced in the 2020, to which Bristol Myers donated funds to 56 nonprofit organizations serving medically underserved populations. So over to Kathy for her presentation on can working with industry benefit patients.
Hey, thank you, Hussein, and thank you, Andy, too, for inviting me today. I won't be long because I think that the speakers already covered so much, not only from the history and resources perspective, but then also, you know, from the industry perspective too. So, Mike, I really appreciated the history and the resources that you shared, and Michael, the 10 Commandments. I think I need those slides. I might have to, you know, borrow those if you don't mind. And Patty, I totally agree. You know, the pharmaceutical companies are very highly regulated, as you know. There are different rules in different countries around how we can partner and how we can work with organizations. But if you do look at us as the advocate for the advocates inside of the companies, I think that's really where we play a really important role. But what I wanted to talk about just a little bit before we go to Q&A today was about some of the partnerships you can work with the organizations, with the pharmaceutical companies that aren't necessarily, you know, fundraising per se, but a couple of things that I think are important to remember for advocacy organizations. Networking is so very important. That's why I'm actually really missing a lot of these in-person meetings, because I think we lose the opportunity to really build those relationships, network with one another in person, and connect people to the right places, whether it's in their organization or across, you know, sectors and across into other organizations. I think it was said here earlier, you know, knowing your companies, you really need to know the disease areas that the companies focus on and also their footprint. I saw in some of the chat, it's a little tougher in the lower and middle income countries. I believe that, I think that is true, but there are programs, there are processes that you can use, but you just are gonna have to do a little bit of homework. Most of our pharma organizations have giving portals on their websites. So you can go on to that website, you can go to the giving portal and really see, you know, learn about the programs, learn about the diseases that they're focused on. And I think, you know, knowing your audience is pretty true. So for the fundraising, I think we've covered a lot, and I'm sure you'll have questions. For other, and I agree from Richard, the red tape should be shortened as much as possible. Sadly, again, I think all of the companies do things a little bit differently. We're very regulated, so compliance and legal are involved, and we do want to ensure, for the most part, the independence of our advocacy organizations, so that you know, so that everybody is compliant. So we don't want to get you guys in trouble either. But sometimes, yeah, it's a little bit confusing, and we do have some work to do there. A couple of things I wanted to just focus on today from the Bristol Myers Squibb side of things, ways you can get involved that can help you network and help you get, you know, have the patient voice heard. Andy was talking about patient voice and drug development and advocacy, access policy. Patty mentioned this. This is a really good way to start to get to know your advocacy teams. So I think there are ways. So we created something called the COVID Advocacy Exchange when COVID first hit. It's now called the Advocacy Exchange, and it's the largest cross-disease, cross-cultural global advocacy initiative right now in healthcare. So this is an online platform. You can go to this at theadvocacyexchange.com. You can register for free. Your organizations, your patients are allowed to participate for free. This is some of the metrics. We have working groups on there. We have live sessions every month. We co-create the content with advocates, again, across diseases and across the world. We actually have people from over 150 now countries who have visited and are participating in the Advocacy Exchange. As a matter of fact, today, later after this session, there's a live session that's really focused on reinventing treatment through the lens of gender. So we're focused on so many different areas, whether that is diversity and inclusion, health equity, access. I saw that brought up a couple times, even fundraising and the future of advocacy, especially with this pandemic. So if you want to check it out, like I said, it's free to all of you. Anybody on this call who's willing and wants to check it out, it's a really great resource and a wonderful way to network, as I had mentioned before, because I can't emphasize enough the networking importance. And I'll probably just fly through some of these. I think we are sharing the slides with the team, so I don't know if I need to read through everything, but we're going to continue this advocacy exchange. It's a partnership with Grit Health, so they own the platform. And like I said, it's a 24-hour platform meant to be a resource for our advocates, for our patients during this incredibly tough time of not being able to see each other in person and have those in-person meetings. So just check that out if you have a chance. Just one example, I should say. I'm only speaking for Bristol Myers Squibb because I know we want to get to the Q&A. Hussein mentioned that we have another initiative called Peer, which is our patient expert engagement resource. This is more of an internal process that we've contracted with over 60 advocacy organizations across diseases and across the globe to bring the patient voice into all of what we do at BMS. So we have started to now make this process holistic so that we can contact any of those organizations and talk to them and get feedback from them on drug development, even in the very early stages, whether that's patient preference, patient journey, carer journey, or clinical trial protocols, all the way through. Patty had mentioned. This is just another opportunity for us to be the advocates for you, for the patients, but working directly with you, working with the experts who are the patients, the advocates. We're looking to expand this program outside of the US this year, starting with several different country pilots. And so we're going to be posting that online soon. You'll see a dashboard where our data, the metrics that we're engaging with these advocates on and these patients on, will be posted so that you can see exactly what we're focused on. And I think, again, that'll be very helpful for those who are interested in partnering with us to see if they are indeed in kind of the right area to partner with BMS. And again, we want to use this feedback to get a better understanding of what's needed. And we know that we have a lot of work to do. So this is all on our bms.com site if you want to check it out. And I'll kind of wrap it up here because I know you want to get to the Q&A, Hussein. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks a lot. Very helpful. And also thanks for re-emphasizing the need to know the disease area in which the industry or the company is interested in, and also to really look after their footprint. And that, again, getting back to the sort of homework that's required for the patient organization to do before contacting or trying to get funding from any industry partners. And also very thankful for highlighting the important online resources of this peer and the advocacy exchange. And I'm sure the people present here would definitely like to join. These slides would be available once we put on our recording of this webinar, as well as the slides of these webinars, so people can look at it. And if in between, if you need any sort of more information on any of these initiatives that's Kathy just highlighted, just let us know, and then we can give you that information as well. So now getting back now to our last speaker. Our last speaker is Kenneth Kabamge, and he is going to talk about his successful experience of submitting a funding application. Kenneth is the founding executive director of the National Organization for People Living with Hepatitis B, and the only patient-driven NGO for rights of hepatitis in Uganda. He is also a member of the Hepatitis Technical Working Committee of the Ministry of Health Uganda, and he's also the past executive board member for the African region at the World Hepatitis Alliance. He is the brain behind the African Hepatitis Summit 2019, which was held in Kampala, and that brought over 600 regional and global leaders working on viral hepatitis for a high-level meeting that led to the Egyptian support towards the treatment of hepatitis C in Africa. He's also a patient advocacy council member of Hepatitis Foundation International, and has extensive patient experience in the field of viral hepatitis, as he has spent more of his life working on advocacy for patients' rights in accessing quality and diagnosis, care, and treatment. So over to Kenneth, please.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my experience on successful fundraising for events in Africa, health events in Africa. Like the moderator already put it, I hosted the Africa Hepatitis Summit, which was held in Uganda in 2009. And it was a successful event, the biggest events in Africa on hepatitis, I must say. And this has been on record because we hosted over 600 delegates across Africa and beyond. And I think that is why the organizers of this webinar had to pick on me to share my personal experience on how I was able to raise the resources. I'm going to go through the steps on how I was able to get the funding from the pharma companies and also government support, because this Africa Hepatitis Summit involved high-level profile stakeholders like ministers of health and other health officials, WHO, CDC, and other high-level delegates. So in the first place, when we started this process, we came up with a concept note. This concept note was basically outlining the objectives of the event and why we need support from both the hosting government, which was the Republic of Uganda, and also other governments across Africa, given the magnitude of hepatitis in Africa. So once we finished the concept note, we shared it with the Ministry of Health. The reason why we shared it with the Ministry of Health, because we wanted to interest them on what we wanted to do and the benefits along that in Uganda and Africa as a whole. So we were invited to attend a top management meeting at the Ministry of Health. We presented, but one of the issues that the ministry had to ask us was about the way we are going to mobilize resources, because for them, they were clear that they didn't have resources. They would allocate for that event, since it was not a ministry-generated event. So we gave them assurances that we had already started potential sponsors from the pharmaceutical industry, and already we had discussions and some commitments from these pharmaceutical companies. So it was very easier for us to actually move on with the Ministry of Health and also have them constitute a national committee that was actually spearheading the preparations of the African Hepatitis Summit. But one thing that also we need to be informed about is the issue of the conference vetting system. There are some pharmaceutical companies that actually subscribe to this system. And if you are not actually, if you have not submitted in your event to the conference vetting system for their approval, then you are most likely not to get funding from some of the pharmaceutical industry, especially those in the diagnostic sector. So we have to submit the concept note, the program, and also the location of the meeting. And once we got the approval, then it was easier for us to get financial support from some of the pharmaceutical industries that were being governed by this conference vetting system. But also, you need to keep in mind that some people want to associate with high-profile people. So you need to put the chair of the meeting as someone of great repute. For example, a professor in the field of if it is viral hepatitis, you need to get a professor in the field of viral hepatitis to spearhead either the scientific committee or the journal, organizing committee of the meeting. Of course, this will actually provide you with a lot of trust from the potential sponsors. Yeah, but also to create a package. You need to create a package for sponsors. So you need to have the platinum sponsor you target with the price and also different benefits. How are they going to benefit from offering a sponsorship of a platinum level, silver level, gold level, bronze level? And that's how we did it. And each category of sponsorship had its own benefits. So it was easier for us to get sponsors because we really targeted their interests in those packages, giving them like a symposia for their organized by their own industry at the event. So these are some of the things that really bring some of these on board. So I must say that the Ministry of Health played a very key role because it was able to invite WHO and other Ministry of Health officials to attend this event. Like I said, it was one of the biggest hepatitis meetings that have so far happened in Africa, with over 600 delegates across Africa, beyond Africa. So basically, that's what I can submit as part of the experience in fundraising. But what I know is that most of the pharmaceutical companies will give you their support, and they will not influence your program because that is not part of their business of giving you the sponsorship. And it is it should be very well aligned in the sponsorship packages. They can only have influence over an event that is entirely organized by them, but not the main program of the event. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Kenneth, for sharing your experience of fundraising. So we just have 10 minutes left. So it's over to Andrew Spiegel, our chair, for facilitating the question and answer and discussion session, and then closing the webinar.
Great. Well, thank you, Hussein, and thank you to all of our great speakers. Going to the chat, there's a couple of questions in the chat that I'm going to ask of the speakers, but we only have about 9 or 10 minutes left. If anybody has questions for the speakers, please put them in the chat. One of the questions was addressed to our industry speakers, and one of the issues that apparently a couple of nonprofits have raised is the time between putting in the application and signing the contract until payment is made. It says here that sometimes that can take 60 to 90 days. And is there anything that can be done to expedite that process? So I'll turn that over to Patty and Kathy for a response.
Sure, I'm happy to start. My experience is that that is highly dependent on the rules and the processes of individual companies. And so you can ask this as you start to talk to a company, ask about what are their rules and their timelines and their process and how to expedite it so that it might not take as long as it previously has. I know for Pfizer, this is something we have been working to improve. So I appreciate that it can be a pain point, and I don't like that it is, but we have those rules in place to be the checks and balances and the guardrails to ensure the independence of the programs, to ensure the activity where funding is permissible. And so I'm sorry that it takes a while, but I think if you have a conversation with your partner, the company partner, that perhaps you could improve the time.
Kathy, anything from you on that?
I mean, I just agree with Patty. You know, sometimes we can't get out of our own way, and you know, when we enter into these, either contracts or funding, it takes a similar timeline sometimes as if it's with one of our other vendors, and we've had these discussions internally. It does vary from company to company, but it's a great point, and we need to work on that. And I think 30 days for a nonprofit would be wonderful, just because you're a nonprofit. So that's something that we're working on our finance side. And then the question that I just saw, Andy, down here was how to keep that independence. I think Patty had mentioned earlier, when we grant funding to these organizations, that's actually written into our contracts, and we are not permitted, no matter what country you live in, to manipulate agendas or programs around our products or around our agenda. So just wanted to clarify that.
Right.
And we have similar provisions in our contracts that it's not about promoting specific projects, and there's no exchange for influence.
Yeah, it's actually in the pharma code. So in the pharma, in the FPA, and then the IFPMA codes, what we are, just the guidance from, and that goes across all countries. It's pretty similar. And I'm sure we can get that to you guys if you need.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful. So another question along the same lines to our industry speakers is that, and we hear this a lot and we experience this a lot, is that, nonprofits are a business. No question about that. They're businesses. They have to be run like businesses if they want to be successful. And as we all know, for businesses to be successful, we need funding. One of the things that sort of ebbs and flows from year to year is what industry wants to fund. Sometimes they only want to fund programs and they don't want to fund infrastructure. And sometimes they don't mind funding infrastructure through maybe corporate giving and things like that. But a question here legitimately discusses that, because a lot of nonprofits find it difficult to fund the non-program stuff, like salaries, like office expense, like overhead, things like that. So how do we go around getting core funding to help nonprofits run their core programs before we even get to the funding of the programs?
Yeah, I mean, I can start, Patty, if you want. So again, differs from company to company, but this really is a good point on having a connection with your advocacy team or your advocacy point of contact, because we are able to talk through, strategic plans and objectives for, the upcoming year or when you're planning, and can talk you through, what at that time our companies are focused. What are our strategic imperatives? Where are we looking to support? Sometimes mission funding is, very important from our perspective, but sometimes there are specific issues that we are more highly focused on. So having that point of contact or knowing who to go to with your pharma partner is really extremely helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the one thing I would add on is, within Pfizer at least, if there's different pots of money, like in different departments, certain departments, there's one department that is able to fund the general infrastructure, and the other groups are not permitted to, according to our rules. They're only permitted to fund certain types of activities. So this comes back to understanding a company's rules about the types of activities they can fund and who can fund it as well.
Andrew, can I throw in here to answer both of them? First of all, for context, foundation funding generally takes about 6 months from original contact, the letter of inquiry, to the time a check is actually written. So I'm amazed that 60 and 90 days is slow. In my side of the world, that's pretty fast. Second piece is that foundations change foci all the time. And this speaks to Mike's point earlier of having diversity of funders and trying to expand those places where you go to get funding. And that's why it's so important to create some form of campaign that finds individuals that may be willing to support you as well.
And along those lines, I was just going to throw a question to the Mike and the Michaels, which is the last time I looked at the foundation directory, I think it was about 1,500 US to subscribe for the year to have access to the searchable database of all foundations. And for some of the smaller and medium-sized nonprofits, that's a lot of money to invest. And frankly, I know me personally and others have not had a lot of success in getting money back from that investment in the foundation directory. So do either of you know a good way to find in some sort of searchable database the right foundation that might fund your mission, your organization, without spending that kind of money?
So, Andrew, I can teach you how to use that database well, in first place. Although it takes a lot of work, and I'd be glad to do that. I am for hire, but I'm glad to give you a class. The second thing is that in most parts of the U.S., there is something called regional associations of grant makers. And most of them maintain both a physical and online library, which will allow you to use their various directories for a smaller fee of one sort or another. You just need to find the one in your particular area, and you can generally get that from the Council on Foundations, which is the membership side of the organization, puts out the foundation directory online. So in the US, there are regional associations of grant makers in various countries. The Council on Foundation can help you identify who that is.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Maybe we could have a standalone webinar on how to search foundations without spending too much money and finding the right one that fits your mission.
Delighted to do it, Andrew.
Well, thank you, Mike. Well, at this time, we're going to end the webinar because I know everybody's got meetings they have to run to, and we're at that time. But I want to thank our speakers. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Hussein, for putting this whole thing together and getting these great speakers. And for all of you, we look forward to our next webinar, which we will announce shortly. And thank you for attending this one. Remember that you will hear soon registration for our African Regional Conference in Cape Town. And of course, our first Patients Global Congress will take place in Rome, October 15th and 16th. Registration will open soon. So watch for those emails and social media posts. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Raise the resources for this successful event.